Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be going over Ezra and Nehemiah and the lists given in regards to the number of men of Israel returning from Babylon back to Judah. So immediately as we start out, it's noticeable that the report here is on the number of men of the people of Israel specifically that are returning to specifically Judah and Jerusalem. Now, Nehemiah does something interesting here because it speaks about the list in the genealogy, a link in identification now too, as we have seen specifically the number of men of the people of Israel. But it states here that this list was found at the first when it was written. So we read here in verse 5, "And my God put him into my heart to gather together the nobles and the rulers and the people, that they might be reckoned by genealogy. And I found a register of the genealogy of them which came up at the first, and were found written there," and it carries on. Now, in Ezra, it simply tells us these are the number of people that came up in the link in identification, as we see now, to the different groups of the men of the people of Israel. And this one now in Nehemiah specifically states this is the number of people at the first that came up. So the important thing now is what we're going to get into is how many people came up, how many people were identified as the Jews, in that case now specifically the number of men of the people of Israel. Now as we're looking at that list, for example, we'll start with the Ezra side. In the book of Ezra given, if we now take the total more that are specified in each group, so that means, for example, the children of Ezra in the third line that we said was 652 initially and came out to 775 final. If we take that difference, which is 775 minus 652, we see that there's 123 more people identified as being a child of Ezra. And then the same thing now if we go down a little bit further to Zatu, which is 845, and then the final figure is 945. We see now that there's 100 more in the final figure of Zatu that's been identified as men of Zatu specifically in this people of Israel. So that total of all the highlights is going down the list. You get the point. It ends up giving us a total there of 606. So for in the book of Ezra, the yellow highlighted regions that I've shown there, when you subtract that from all the other groups given in the first list at first, the difference there of how many more it is 606. And now as we do the same thing for in the book of Nehemiah with this list that was picked up at the first initially, what was recorded. For example, in the fourth line, we looked at already Pharaoh of Moab 2818, and in the final in Ezra 2812. So we have 6 people out of that group that put their hands down and say, I'm not going to identify as a child of Pharaoh of Moab in that group. And the next example in this book of Nehemiah, and the list that is, it says the children of Bani Obinu, which is 648. And then in the book of Ezra, it came down to 642. So we can see there's another 6 people out of that group that left that group, for example. So the total number there that was extra, and now again, taking the difference and adding them all together, gives us a total as being 1877 extra in Nehemiah that's been listed, i.e. these yellow highlighted that I put there to show, more than the final amount. So now we notice that the number of men of the people of Israel, total that came forward in these subgroups that was identified, was given as a surplus in Ezra as being 606, and was given as a surplus in Nehemiah as being 1,877. So Nehemiah doesn't account for 606 of these men that came forward in these groups, whereas Ezra doesn't account for 1,877 of these men of the people of Israel that came forward. So when we look at the subtotals of Ezra, for example, which is 29,818 of all the groups that Ezra lists forward, we know now that that is short by 1,877. So when we add 1,877 to it, that's been reported in Nehemiah, but not in Ezra because it was short in the final, we get a total number of 31,695. These are the total number of men of the people of Israel that came forward in these subgroups that was made known to us. And to confirm that now, we see that the total number in Nehemiah's list of all these subgroups was 31,089. But Nehemiah came short by 606 that Ezra's reported that Nehemiah didn't account of. So when we add that 606 to Nehemiah's total list, we also get 31,695 men of the people of Israel that came forward and got identified. So now we see that there's no contradiction in the number that came identified. We only now have to understand, which I'm going to show right now as to why, these subgroups have a different number of the men of the people of Israel. How and why did that change from the initial that came forward and then the final that actually went forth out of Babylon to Judah and Jerusalem? Now the scripture over here, these both, they give the same thing in the list. This is the answer. I'm going to read one of them here. It says, and of the priests, the children of Habiah, the children of Koz, the children of Barzillai, which took one of the daughters of Barzillai, the Gilead, to wife, and was called after their name. So, i.e. these children, they got it into a marriage, and they identified as a child of that other group. And it says, as a result of that, reading the next line, these sought their register among those that were reckoned by genealogy, but it was not found. Therefore were they, as polluted, put from the priesthood. So in this example here of these priests and these sons, the children of these priests, that were supposed to be in this list of the men of Israel, they got married. There was a marriage now, an intermarriage with a different group of people. And as a result, they took that different groups of people's name. So they became known no longer as a child of Parosh, for example. They became now known as a child of MacDonald. And as an example of that, this then leads them to not be found in the register. So the marriage that took place from the initial list to the actual list that went out, it counts for these differences. Because if I get married now into this family and I take on now the title as a child of Parosh because I got married to the daughter of Parosh, and I before was in the group underneath that. I was in a different group of the men identified. This shows this movement from a higher number to a lower number, or from a lower number to a higher number because of the marriage, and then taking the names of their wives, being in that case which child they are from. So the overview is there's 42,360 people in congregation that are journeying from Babylon all the way back to Jerusalem and Judah. Out of those, 31,695 are specifically men of the people of Israel that are journeying back. The other people that are going along with them, as we've just read a moment ago, are those that are not counted as men of the people of Israel specifically, but rather those that just went along with. And we saw a moment ago that people lost their titles when they took on different titles, but they were still included in that list, but not numbered. So that brings us to the third point in the overview, is that why did some groups of people, in this case of subdivisions, have different number of children? Because that child took on a different title through a marriage when he married a different woman. It could be of a different tribe, it could be within a tribe of the people of Israel. That's why we see figures going up, we see figures going down. And it could be somebody completely not related to Israel, like we just read a moment ago, where they completely were taken out of this count. So now as we see Nebuchadnezzar, after he's taken these captives, we've just been reading that the men of the people of Israel, along with the congregation of people, planned an exodus and did make an exodus from Babylon back to Judah and Jerusalem. However, this took place in 3 different times, meaning there were 3 different periods when this exodus took place. It happened once, it happened twice, it happened a 3rd time. The first time was led by Zerubbabel while Cyrus was king, and that's what we've just been reading now in Ezra and Nehemiah. Thereafter, later also in the book of Ezra, as is said, Ezra leads the charge as the leader now also in the 2nd exodus from Babylon to Judah and Jerusalem, while Artaxerxes rules. And then years later, while Artaxerxes is also ruling, Nehemiah is the leader now that leads the people back from Babylon to Judah and Jerusalem. So this shows that the number of exoduses that was happening from Babylon all the way back to Jerusalem and Judah shows that the Jewish people wanted to return for a while. And this is now why when Nehemiah picks up this register and reads it as it says, at the first, these are the people that were planning to go, because they were planning for quite a while to exodus back. And initially, these people put down their names and they said, listen, I'm from this tribe and this is however many under me, and we're going to go back and we're going to go on this journey with you. But then what actually happens when it's time to leave is a register now that we just went through, where it's both the same total amount of people in the congregation leaving, and also the men of the people of Israel are exactly the same in both books, as we've just proved. So that's the further understanding here as to why there was a first scroll picked up. So therefore, while these people are planning on returning in the process of that time in the list, they get married, they join different marriages, and either from one tribe to another, and then this is how these numbers are shifting within these subgroups and divisions. Whereas it is still the same number of people that ended up going down, it was just under a different name.